So in this video I'll be showing you how to add the fog so that once you move out of range of an area where you've been will then get fogged over. And I'll also be showing you how to interrogate the data in the grid to check whether or not you can move to a position by, so essentially you'll be able to restrict your movement so that you can't click under the shroud and move there. You can only move to a place you've uncovered. And I'm going to show you how to have the grid monitor multiple objects, so there are multiple objects clearing the shroud, and this will get updated if you remove those objects. So we're going to create a script and we're going to call it shroud add fog. Now inside this script what we're going to do is we're going to loop through the shroud grid and we're going to look at the number stored in the grid cell, and if it's 0 we're going to make it 0.5 and basically add fog to it, so we can say this area has been cleared, so we're going to fog it. So we're going to do two nested for loops. So we're going to say for var r equals 0, r is less than the number of rows, which is ds grid height obj shroud dot shroud grid, and then increment r. Try that again, there we go. And within this we will nest another for loop, this time for column, which is going to go from 0 to c is less than the ds grid height, which again is for obj shroud dot shroud grid, and we increment that. So now inside here we have the cell. We can access the specific cell we're at with R and C. So what we'll do is we'll say if obj shroud dot shroud grid, use the accessor and go R comma C equals 0. So we're going to say okay, look at the cell at this location. If it's 0 we're going to make it 0.5. So just grab that, copy it and make it equal 0.5. There we go. And that's it. Now the fog has been added. So we need to test that this works. So what I'm going to do is close that and I'm going to head to the obj shroud, which is still open here. What I'm going to do is have it continuously apply fog. And I'm do this with a control variable, which will be a boolean, and we'll call it continuous fog. Okay, default it to true. Close that. Now what we need to do is call this the shroud add fog. Now if you remember, if we went up to if we go to red obj red circle, we're currently clearing the shroud in the end step, and we want to add the fog before we then clear the shroud. Otherwise, if the shroud is cleared earlier in the step than the fog is added, then whenever it's cleared it'll immediately be fogged over. So we need to fog over the cleared cells and then update to the current cleared cells over the top of that. So we need to put, if we return to obj shroud, we need to add a begin step to make sure it happens before the actual clearing. and we're going to say if continuous fog shroud add fog, and that's it. So now if we save this and run it, so when we move around, as you can see, where you've been and is no longer in range, it gets fogged over. Now I'm going to make a change to this, because at the moment it's happening every step. We don't need it happening every step. So I'm going to go in and default turn off that variable, continuous fog. And I'm going to return to object red circle. And what I'm going to do is in this end step, I'm going to say if moving. So if this thing's moving, clear the shroud. If it's not moving, we don't need to clear the shroud. And this will then call the add fog. So we say shroud add fog. This way we're handing over control of clearing the actual shroud and updating the shroud to the active object. And it's again, you clear the fog before you then clear the new position. So now if we run it again, we should see no difference. Well, we see a slight difference in that we haven't actually cleared the fog on initial start. So what we currently have is only when the object is moving will it actually clear position. But when we started, it was all black because we hadn't moved at all, which means we actually need to initialize or initially clear the position. So let's add that to the room start event. So we're going to copy this line here, we're going to go to the room start and we're going to paste it in. And now when we run it, we can see that it starts and the position has already been pre-cleared. And everything's working okay. However, what happens if I click on the shroud, which is the void area that I can't see or interact or know anything about? Well, I move there, which is no good at all. We want to move to an object. We want to move to an area we know about, which is what's under the fog. We've been there. We know what's there. We can move there. But what's under the shroud, we don't want to move there. We need to restrict this movement so that you can only go where you've been. So let's do that now. So we need to create a script that checks if the point that you've clicked on is under the shroud or not, and then use that to determine whether or not you can move there. Now, because we're storing a number, a floating point number in the grid, it's going to be tricky to make that directly convert that to a boolean, because essentially the 0.5 so if it was a case of saying we could have 0 is false, 1 is true, 0.5 is also true, but we want the 0.5 group with 0, so we want 0 and 0.5 both returning the same thing. So we need to say, so we're going to create a script. Let's create a new script and we'll call it shroud point is clear. And what this is going to do is just check if position is clear by taking two arguments. We're going to say var px equals argument spell argument right, come on, argument 0 times, no wait, div obj shroud dot grid size. Copy that, paste it, make it argument 1 and py. So we've converted the supplied xy coordinate, the one we're asking to be checked, into grid coordinates on within the shroud. And now we're going to get the corresponding value. So we're going to var s equals shroud obshroud.shroudGrid, obshroud.shroudGrid, use the accessor and go px, py. So now we've grabbed the contents of that grid cell, put it into S. So now we need to interrogate it and say, okay, we need to now return a boolean based on this, the contents of this cell. There are a number of ways we could do this. We could directly use the value, because you can treat numbers as booleans, in which case 0 we want to say 0 is true, 0.5 is true, and 1 is false. So that's what we want to be returning. Now we could subtract 1, then invert it, and things like that, and you could try some number juggling to try and convert these, because essentially 0 is false and 1 is true. So we need to convert them into that, which you could do some number juggling, maybe a bitwise operation to convert it, but I'm going to keep things nice and simple, and I'm just going to say var bool equals false. So I'm going to initialize this boolean to false, and then I'm going to say if s is less than 1, so it's 0 or 0.5, boolean equals true. No, that's not correct. True. No, why am I putting underscore? Damn it. Okay. Brain is functioning again. And then I simply return this bool, which is nice and simple. So now I have a function where I simply say, are these x and y coordinates in a position I can move to, and it will return yes or no if you can get there. So I now need to actually put this somewhere to use it, and that means returning to the red circle object, going into global right pressed, and when we click, we actually want to ask the question, is the mouse x and y coordinates that we've clicked on, are they in a position where we can actually move to? So we say if shroud position is clear, point is clear. I did shroud point is clear. If shroud point is clear, mouse x, mouse y, and then if it is, we can do all this movement stuff that we have. So we put that within the brackets. Now, if I run the game, when I click on the currently uncovered area, I can move there. If I click on the fogged area, I can move there. If I click on the shroud, nothing happens. It won't let me move to a position under the shroud. Now you can also use this function to say, display things like, if you want things to be moving or not moving under the shroud, you can ask it, am I under the shroud? Am I going to be playing sound effects or things like that? You could do a second version, a modified version, or copy the script to ask if it's just under the fog, because you might want to not, if you have an AI moving around under the fog, you want to hide that. So we're probably going to want to have a script saying is under fog. So we'll create that by duplicating shroud point is clear and call it shroud under fog. Open it up. Now what we want to do is, if it's greater than 0.1, so if s is greater than 0.1, so there's any value up, or rather we're going to say not equal to 0. So if it's not 0, return true. So what this one's now doing is saying, okay, is the point which we clicked under the fog, and it returns true if it's under the fog. Now what if you have multiple red objects, or let's add some code to the blue blocks to make them also clear the shroud. Now at the moment, clearing the shroud is controlled by red circle objects in the end step. What I want to do is comment that out, and we're going to go to the ob shroud, and we're going to create a monitor list. So monitor list equals ds list create. And what we're going to do now is we're going to create a little bit and give the shroud the ability to actually monitor a bunch of objects that have been registered to it and clear the shroud over those objects' positions. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to red circle object, and in its room start event we're going to register this object to the monitor list by saying ds list add obj shroud dot monitor list. Why is my underscore not working? Rubbish keyboard. And just add the ID. So by doing this, the shroud now has the object ID of this red circle in a list that it holds, so it can check against this list and be like, one at a time, clear any object that's in its list. Now what we want to do is actually copy these lines here, open obj blue block, add in a room start event, and then paste this in. Just like that. So now the blue block is also going to be clearing the shroud and fog. But what we also want to do is I'm going to add a little left pressed. So if we click on the block, I want to delete this block to demonstrate that it can test that the monitor list can be dynamically updated effectively. So all it'll do is, if it's clicked on, it will say ds list delete obj shroud dot monitor list. That's not how I spelt monitor list. That's how I spelt monitor list. And then for the index we go ds list find index, and again we give it obj shroud dot monitor list as its list ID, and the value we're looking for is ID. Yeah, it's just ID, because we're looking for this thing's ID and we're deleting its entry in the list, and then we destroy it. Bing. Now we're also, before we actually go ahead and, I think we can close this, we need to change the script that clears position, shroud clear position script. So I'm going to change shroud clear position so that instead of supplying an XY position, you now pass an ID. So all I have to do is put 0, change it to argument 0, put .x and y there, and then down here we I just copy the argument dot and we just put that there. So now this with this function we're supplying the ID of the thing that needs to be cleared. Now if I return to red circle, I'm still at red circle, but if I go to the end step, which I commented out earlier, this shroud clear position, now all we do is put ID here, and that still works. But I'm going to copy that, comment that back out, because we now want to return to ob shroud, and return control of clearing the shroud to shroud. So let's add another control variable, which will be a boolean, and we'll call it fog clear regular. Mr. G, there we go, just a boolean, and we'll default it to true. Now we're going to add a room start event, and inside this we're going to trigger alarm 0, and alarm 0 will regularly clear the shroud. So what we'll say is if fog clear regular fog trigger time equals room speed times, I'm going to go with 0.33, so 3 times a second it will clear the fog, and then we're going to go alarm 0 equals 1, so that kicks it off. Now we're going to need to create alarm 0, and inside here, every third of a second, if fog is on, of course, if fog, no, come on, if fog on, there we go, if fog on, we're going to clear it, and we're also going to re-trigger alarm 0 every fog trigger time. And we'll say stop adding the fog, so we say shroud add fog, so we add fog to anywhere that's been cleared, and now we clear the current amount of fog, and I want to get the size of the monitor list, so var ds this size monitor list. So I grab a size of the monitor list, and if the size of the monitor list is more than 0, because there's stuff in there, we're going to loop through this list. So we're going to say for var a equals 0, a is less than s said, a plus plus. We're going to say if, we'll check the instance exists, because it's always, I mean, it should always exist, because it's registers itself when it's born, and then when it's destroyed it removes itself, so there shouldn't be any point at which it doesn't exist. And potentially, like if Gamemaker allowed you to create a debug version and a release version, which it doesn't currently because you don't have the hash of def stuff that you can do in like C++ and stuff, you could create a little separate bits here which were like, in debug we'll do an instance exists check, that way if it ever fails we can debug it and fix it, and then if you can't, then if it in release we don't use it, and we just assume that because of the way this code has been designed it should never be a case of this instance in this list not existing, because as soon as it ceases to be in the destroy event it gets removed. But we're going to do the safety code and check for it anyway, just to be on the safe side. So we're going to say monitor list, different accessor for a list, it's not the hash, it's the sign. Not the sign, I mean, it's the funny vertical line for the accessor. So if instance exists monitor list, so the instance that we're currently updating to does exist, so then we just call shroud clear position. No, that's not what I called it. Wait, that is what I called it. Shroud clear position monitor list A. So we call our shroud clear position and we supply the entry in the list and it will just clear it. And that should be all we need to do. So if I run it, okay, so it didn't quite run properly because I didn't go back and update the shroud clear position in red circle object or in the blue block to say ID. So you need to go to both of those room start events in both red circle object and the blue block and change shroud clear position to be ID. And now if it runs, it should work. Ta-da! And yep, we move around. It does move to where the shroud is. Here's the fog. If I click on the blue block, it gets deleted and that gets updated. And there we go. So that's how to create a fog of war and a shroud. It's great for RTS games, strategy games, RPGs, action games, anything top down. And there you go. Hopefully this has been a useful video for you and you've learnt something. If you have, give it a like and subscribe. I'm going to try and do some more videos soon. I'm currently working on an AI finite state machine with transitions, which is quite a kind of a big thing to do, which I'm kind of halfway through putting that together. I also did some tooltips recently and I think those scripts are quite neat, and I'll do a little video of them because that'll be useful for people. And I was making a little squad RTS type, RPG RTS type game recently, which I think that prototype was quite interesting, and I might make a little tutorial out of that. So yeah, like and subscribe, and hopefully some new videos coming soon.